our donkey person here at the village. So if you have our donkeys, it's because of
Have any of you ever dug for buried pirate treasure? I have. Now, there are lots of pirates who you could go looking for their treasure. Captain Kidd, Calico Jack, even Anne Bonny, one of the most awesome woman pirates. But if you're really going to go digging for pirate treasure, you might as well go for the most notorious pirate's treasure. And y'all all know who that is, right? Blackbeard. Blackbeard was a fearsome pirate. He was born Edward Teach. He was a real guy. He was actually trained to sail by the British Navy, as all the best pirates were. He was fearsome on the deck of a ship. They say he was over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, lean-bodied. He had thick, black, scruffy hair and a thick, long beard. He would braid little pigtails into it, sometimes tie fancy ribbons just to make his appearance even stranger. And before he attacked an enemy ship, he would weave long burning fuses under his hat and in his beard, so he was wreathed with smoke. Now, if that wasn't enough to make you give up right then, that's okay. His ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, had 40 cannons, and she wasn't his only ship. He had 7 more that sailed along with him, captained by some of his best friends. They could get away with anything they wanted to, and they did, from the coast of Virginia all the way down to the Caribbean. In fact, in May of 1718, they blockaded Charleston Harbor. I mean, with 8 ships, you really can blockade a whole city. 5 days they held the city hostage, especially because they had some of the most important citizens on board with them. What they wanted for ransom was a chest of medicine. Well, while you're sitting there waiting for 5 days, you might as well rob blind every ship that sails into the harbor. There were 9 of them. Their boats started riding a little low in the water, if you know what I mean. So Blackbeard sent Israel Hand, his top man, to take a hand-selected crew over to the tip of James Island, a place called Folly, and bury some of their treasure. They took 6 chests. When they got the hole dug, put those chests down in, before anyone knew what was going on, Israel Hand pulled his pistol and BAM! Shot one of the pirates. And he fell in on top of the chest. He said, "All right, cover him up, boys. That's our guardian. No one but Blackbeard will come claim this treasure now." They covered everything back up, got in their boats, and sailed back to the ships, and thought no one knew what had happened. But they were wrong. There was an enslaved man from a nearby plantation who had seen everything. Now, he knew he couldn't get the treasure. No one would believe he had that much. He'd be hung for stealing. But he didn't want to go there anyway. He was afraid of ghosts, and he had seen what they had done to that other pirate, so he marked the spot well in his memory. He told his family, and they kept guardianship. Generation after generation, the enslaved people on that plantation knew where that spot was. After a few decades, they planted a line of trees just to make it a little more clear. One big oak tree and several palmettos. Well, over 150 years passed. Charleston started the Civil War right out in the harbor, within sight of where the treasure was buried. And that was an important place. Just a little around the bend, they built a fort, because whoever controlled that passage into the harbor controlled the city. The Confederates had it at first, but the Union troops knew that they had to take that point over. So in 1863, they started massing for a major battle. They didn't want any non-combatants injured, so they started moving people off the island, including the enslaved. one little old lady, as she was leaving her cabin, looked over to the trees, and she told Private Yoakum, the young man that was helping her gather up and move to the ship that was going to take him down to Port Royal. She said, "You beware of those trees over there. You're a nice boy. I don't want anything to happen to you, sir. You stay away from that, and then the pirate ghost won't get you. He's guarding evil, cursed treasure, and I don't want anything to happen to you." And so he all but pinky promised, and he crossed his fingers behind his back. As soon as he got back home, well, back to camp, he found his best friend, Lieutenant Hatcher, and he and Hatcher requisitioned a couple of shovels and started hiking. They went out to that line of trees and got there just about dusk and decided it was time to start digging. So dig they did. Now, digging is hard work, as I'm sure y'all know. But they were soldiers. They were used to hard work. So they just dug and dug. And along about midnight, something kind of strange happened. The wind started blowing in the tops of those trees. It got stronger and stronger until it was like a hurricane up there, but there wasn't a breath of wind down where they were, and they were sure kind of wishing there was. Well, that did seem odd. They kept digging. They were getting deeper. About an hour after that, whoosh, lightning flashed and lit the sky up like it was midday. There wasn't a clap of thunder, and they could still see the stars. Well, that was very strange, but they wanted that treasure, so they kept digging. And within about 30 more minutes, they hit something solid. A terrible stench filled the air, and shh, another one of those lightning flashes with no sound. And at that moment, Private Yoakum and Lieutenant Hatcher realized they were not alone. Between them stood a most fearsome pirate. Dirty clothes, ragged hair, you can see where the gunshot was, and his eyes were dark as the night sky. Well, they did what any sensible person would do. They dropped their shovels and ran all the way back to camp. They didn't tell a soul, and the next day, the battle for Fort Wagner started. It was a 4-month siege. They didn't get to go back to check on the treasure in the daylight. 50 years later, Lieutenant Hatcher told this story at a reunion of Union soldiers. Somebody wrote it down, and that's how my friend Stephen got a hold of it. Now, Stephen and I were quite the pair, not a couple, not that kind of thing. He was the adventurous type, and I loved to uncover those historical mysteries. Now, we both had our day jobs, but in our off times, we were looking for that. We found the tunnels underneath Charleston, figured out the old way to get into them. Huge bricked tunnels running under the city. No one had been in them in decades. I didn't go, because you had to go in at the tide, and there were snakes and rats. I don't like rats. So when Stephen came to me with the story of Blackbeard's treasure, I was a little interested, but I mean, really, who goes digging for buried treasure? We did. We started looking at the maps, overlaying the modern day maps and where the shorelines and the little rivers were, with the battle maps and with the plantation maps from the 1700s. And we found that there were some real possibilities. We discovered that the people mentioned in the story had been real. We started driving around down there on Folly, seeing what we could find. The problem was there were neighborhoods there now, so it made it a little tricky. What we were looking for were really old oak trees. Now, the tree could have been lost in hurricanes. Charleston certainly gets her fair share of them, but Stephen called me a couple weeks after we had scouted out some areas and said, "I found it. It's the oldest oak tree on the island. I looked at the arborist reports. I know where it is. I was like, yes, and whose backyard is it in? He said, no, it's vacant land, but there are houses nearby, so we should start digging after dark. And that's exactly what we did. We were smart. We parked our car down the street so that we wouldn't draw attention to the spot. And we kind of snuck our shovels in and we started digging. Now, digging is hard work, but I work with animals, and Stephen had done quite a few stints with lawn care, so we were pretty good with shovels. It was a little tricky with the roots, but we dug, and long about midnight, on the tops of that huge old oak tree, the wind started blowing. And it got harder and faster until it was hurricane force. And there wasn't a breath of breeze where we were. We could have been scared, but instead we got really excited. We were in the right spot. So we started digging faster. Oh, about an hour later, whoosh, there was that flash of light. I couldn't tell where it came from, but it lit everything up. It was just like the story. We dug faster and faster, and about 45 minutes in, we hit something hard. We scraped around trying to find the shape of it, and the worst smell surrounded us. Oh, it was, I'm glad you couldn't smell it. It was so rank. And then there was another flash of light, and we heard from behind us a voice. And the voice said, "Why are you digging up the sewer?" We did what any sane person would do. We dropped our shovels and ran as fast as we could to the car before the cops could come after us. And that is the story of the time I went digging for pirate treasure.